Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the participants who are here online. My name is Sheila Sinharoy. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University in the Department of Global Health, and I'll be moderating our session today on gender challenges in urban sanitation. And so our schedule for today, oops. Oh my gosh, I've already messed up. Okay, so our schedule for today, we have a series of presentations that I'm really excited about. We are starting with Dr. Bethany Caruso from Emory University. And then we have a series of presentations from city partners. So we have Mr. Alan Nkuruziza from Kampala Capital City Authority. In Uganda, we have Professor Chari from the Administrative Staff College of India, and he's based in Hyderabad. And then we have Mr. Alauddin Ahmed from ITN Buet in Dhaka. And then we have Ms. Beatrice Chigwe from Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company in Zambia. So each of them will be sharing their experiences, their lessons learned on what has worked, where they've encountered challenges and how they've dealt with them in integrating gender in urban sanitation. And so this is really an opportunity for us to learn from their direct experiences working in urban sanitation and integrating gender in their work. And so we're really, really excited to learn from them. And so we'll just jump right in with our first presenter, Dr. Bethany Caruso. Dr. Caruso is an assistant professor in the Hubert Department of Global Health at Emory University. She is a social and behavioral scientist with over a decade of water, sanitation, and hygiene sectoral research experience. And her research focuses on understanding how compromised wash conditions impact physical and mental health, behavior, education, and empowerment, with a specific focus, as many attendees will know from, will be already familiar with her work, a specific focus on girls and women throughout their life course. Bethany, welcome. And, oh, sorry. Just to add, we're going to ask everyone to just hold their questions for our five speakers. They're going to speak, consecutively. And so we'll ask everyone to hold your questions because we do have a Q&A session at the end. And for those online, there is a Q&A box in Zoom. So please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll come to you also during the Q&A session.
Thanks, Sheila. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to talk today about measuring urban sanitation and empowerment, and specifically sharing some background about that work, but also specific evidence that we have from Kampala. So MUSE, which stands for Measuring Urban Sanitation and Empowerment, has the overall goal of creating and validating measures of sanitation-related empowerment. There may have been sessions that you've been at before. You might have been told that you cannot quantitatively measure anything related to gender, but our goal is actually to actually do the opposite and create some valid measures. This work is specifically grounded in a conceptual model of empowerment, which has three domains: agency, resources, and institutional structures, which you can see here. Within each of those domains are multiple subdomains. The work that we did actually creates measures for each of those individual subdomains. And we do have some stuff available online. So for those of you who are taking pictures, I'm happy to share better resources after. But go ahead. Today, what we're going to do, we have 4 domains that we're specifically going to share information about: safety and security, financial and productive assets, decision-making, and norms. So we do cover all of them. We have scale scores for each of these measures, but we're going to focus in on some specific items from those scales and indices. This work had multiple phases, has multiple phases for validating across multiple cities and over time. For the current purposes of this talk, we're just sharing data collected between November 2019 and June 2020, because that has informed some of the work of our colleagues who are going to be talking next from Kampala. But overall, the work is now being carried out in multiple locations globally for validation. The work is going to be, these results are all in Impala, and I'm going to share now first data related to sanitation. I know that the text on the bottom is small, but I have key notes to bring home the key points of this. What we found related to safety security in Kampala specifically is that of the women surveyed, we have over 1,000. 37% indicated that they feared sexual assault, 46% feared physical harm, and 46% indicated feeling unsafe, specifically when going to sanitation locations in the evening. Further, as a result, 38% chose a different sanitation location at night, and 47% also indicated that they were too afraid to use a sanitation location at night. Talking about financial and reproductive assets. Oh, you can't see the top of these slides, can you? You can't see the headers.
The three dots.
Yeah.
Be able to hide. There should be some, click on that please, and then go down. There should be hide video panel, I think is what it is.
Hi, this one?
Or one of those two.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, now you can see what I'm talking about. So this is financial and reproductive not reproductive, financial and productive assets. Women reported 37% of women reported that they needed to ask permission, and 43% indicated depending on somebody else for small sanitation purchases. So these include things like toilet paper, if they use it, soap, or even pay-per-use latrines. Further, go with it when I get to the next slide. Okay. Over 50% indicated, over half indicated that they don't have any income or any way contributing financially to sanitation improvements. This is again all among women in Kampala. And that's really important because finances are really critical to decision making. And so when we asked about agency, specifically to household level decision making, we found that fewer women participate in household decision making when large expenditures are involved. So you'll see the bar graph on the far left-hand side, 85% of women indicated they could independently make decisions about small sanitation-related purchases like soap, toilet paper, etc. While for large expenditures, only 41% indicated they can influence those major decisions, and 31% indicated that they can independently make those decisions related to household sanitation, like constructions, repairs, and improvements. And then we get to the decision-making in the community. We find that on this side, we see 50% of women have indicated that they have attended a community meeting about sanitation. But as you look along the scale, it indicates different levels of participation. So speaking up, being listened to, engaging local leaders, and having influence. So while 50% have attended, there's only 32% who've indicated that they've made decisions about sanitation in their community. And then finally, much related to some of the work of our colleagues at ITN View yesterday morning, if you were able to attend, thinking about the work of sanitation. So here you'll see 71% indicated that it was agreeable, that they agreed that it would be socially unacceptable for women to be participating in construction, repairs, or upgrades to latrines and toilets. And 93% agreed that emptying latrine pits should be done by men, not women. So there are pretty important norms here. So the take-home sort of message here is that certainly we can measure gender specific outcomes. It is possible and it should be carried out. And the reason that it's important is that these data can be used to identify priority areas of focus, inform targeted policy and practice initiatives, and also once these data are collected to track changes over time if there are policy and practice initiatives that take place. So with that, I will send some thanks and also hand it back to Sheila.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm sure people have questions. Again, we're just asking everyone to hold their questions, and we're going to move right into our next speaker, who is virtual. Mr. Alan Nkuruziza is a program manager in the Directorate of Public Health and Environment in the Kampala Capital City Authority in Uganda. He is responsible for the citywide inclusive sanitation project that aims to achieve equitable and universal access to improved wash services, thereby increasing safely managed sanitation in the city. Alan holds a master's degree in water and environmental engineering from the University of Surrey in the UK. Alan, are you able to share your screen?
Thank you, Sheila. I hope so. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Remember that it needs to be on full screen mode.
Yep. So hello, everyone, and thank you very much. I am going to be giving a bit of context to what Bethany has just shared, and then hopefully how we're also using the data to try and tackle some of those issues that came out of that. So I'm really going to talk about how we're integrating gender in urban sanitation in Kampala. And for those that don't know where Kampala is, it's in Uganda, in East Africa. It's a relatively big city of 3 million people during the day and 1.5 million at night. So we do have a huge commuter population. But what's interesting in terms of gender is that 53% of that population is actually women or female, and nearly 50% of that is youth or adults under 19 years, as well as kids. And maybe the last bit being that nearly 60% of the population lives in informal settlements. So why gender? Gender mainstreaming, or the gender agenda in Uganda is not new. It has been around for nearly 20 years now. And we've seen some strides in terms of mainstreaming in the form of policies, in form of strategies, and really cascading right from the national level down to the city level. And of course, these are linked or aligned to the national as well, to the global goals as well as national goals. However, as Bethany just presented, there's still some gender inequalities that are still persisting in our communities, and where some progress has been made, it's been limited to certain sectors, and so we're not seeing this really coming across to sanitation as well. So in comes the program, or the idea of trying to integrate gender or mainstream it in the sanitation programs at the city. And in terms of the roadmap, that illustration shows what has been done, that initially started off with a gender analysis, where the idea was to try and identify those unserved needs of men and women and the city, of course, not forgetting the youth and the elderly. But then the work that Bethany has just shared came in immediately afterwards, and it was quite handy because it helped us understand better why those needs are unserved. So the dynamics between men and women through the lens of that empowerment framework that looks at those three domains of agency, resources, and institutions. And then after that, we did carry out a gender audit just to try and, firstly develop indicators that would help in the programming, but as well as get some baseline data where it was missing, so that it helps to inform an integration plan. So what we're implementing right now is an integration plan, and together with the indicators, there's a monitoring stage where we try and just make sure that we're trying to adhere to this plan as much as we can. And in terms of some key findings, I'll briefly just go through the key ones from the gender analysis. There are no surprises in the sense that it was shown that inadequate sanitation affected men and women differently, but the most affected were the low-income groups and the women. And further to that, there were differences between men and women, as well as the social norms that contributed to that inadequate access to sanitation. And then lastly, the resources were one of the key constraints to accessing sanitation, again, as Bethany highlighted. So I won't mention the middle bit because that's what Bethany has just gone through. But from the audit, sorry, that should have read audit on the far right, it was really trying to get some baselines, but it also identified that the decisions on the siting and location and generally the services, sanitation services, tended to be made by men. And again, this is something that Bethany's presentation has highlighted very well, but also getting some statistics in terms of the number of women that are registered under the MTS Association. So that was less than 5. And in terms of the institution within the city, a quarter of the staff not being aware of the mainstreaming gender strategies. Why this is all important, it just helps to shed light on why, whereas there are policies that are supportive, the impact on the ground or the outcomes are slightly different. So, as we mentioned, we set out and developed an gender integration plan that we are following. And some of the indicators under that plan were that we would develop those indicators, which has been done, that would try and leverage gender data to guide programming. So that is also being done, as well as creating some very intentional processes or criteria that would aim to promote equity and inclusiveness by some form of affirmative action for the sections of the community that were not benefiting from self-managed sanitation as it should be. So again, I won't go through the full list, but that's just to give an idea of some of the activities that are within the integration plan. What I'll do is just show what has been achieved. And again, this is not exhaustive. It's just a few key highlights that from the gender data, we can see that wherever there's a wash activity, so water or sanitation, and those are some of the examples, we find that slightly more than half of the participants are women. And this is good because we know that they are the key users of these services, wash services, and as such, they should participate in any engagements that are related to wash. When it came to a subsidy that we are running in the city to help the households in low-income communities access emptying services, toilet emptying services, as well as toilet improvement, so construction of improved toilets. The data, again, there showed that 90% of the beneficiaries were vulnerable, and these were mostly either child or elderly-headed households or female-headed households, but nearly 50% overall of the beneficiaries were women. So again, this was important because we really needed to target these vulnerable groups as part of the integration plan that was developed. The associations for the MTS have revised their policies to include gender, and so they have been engendered, and now we're seeing more participation by women. And although the presentation Bethany showed at the time that the perception was that women wouldn't partake of such activities, we are seeing more and more women participating in sanitation activities currently. So 24% have participated in social activities, and we've had at least 10 businesses, so pit emptying businesses that are headed by women. And overall, women are now accounting for 13% of the members, up from the 5% at the time of the gender analysis. So what are we saying? We're saying that the journey for integration, that initial stage of analysis, so the gender analysis, the muse and assessments, as well as the gender audit, really helped to clarify what the barriers to women's participation were, and that led then to a gender plan, integration plan that we are trying to follow, but the main intention being to have a gender lens applied to the programming, to the activities, and as subsequently to the resources that are required for the sanitation programs. The other bit that we've seen so far is that being very intentional about women's issues, youth issues, elderly issues, or groups can help contribute to a more long-term empowerment agendas, because then they take ownership, and it is something that can sustainably thrive even without support from the city going forward. I think the rest you can see, but what I'll finish off on the conclusion is that although the plans are in place, although we have the policies in place, what we see is that the investments required to see these policies and plans through is inadequate. So this is something that will need to be addressed for anybody thinking about mainstreaming, that sufficient investments or resources are set aside for this. In terms of the lessons learned, I think the key one for us is that the sex disaggregated data has been very crucial in our programming, because it shows us, it helps us to track how the gender mainstreaming or the integration or even the empowerment is coming along. It's also worth noting that the 3 domains of empowerment are closely linked. So when you're looking at agency, institutional aspects will come up, resource aspects will come up, and likewise. So those 3 aspects are very important to think about when you're on this journey of gender. And then I'll finish off with that comment that the participation of men is also very important in achieving these gender outcomes. As you saw from Bethany's presentation, they're the ones that make the decisions, they're the ones that have most of the resources. And so it's very key that as we're having conversations around gender, that men participate in that as well. Thank you very much, Sheila. I think I'll stop there. Hopefully I'm within my time.
Thank you, Ellen, for sharing your lessons learned and those many complexities and considerations along the way in your gender integration. We will move on now to our next speaker, Professor Srinivas Chari Vadala from ASCI. Professor Chari is the Center Director at the Administrative Staff College of India, or ASCI. He leads the Center for Environment, Urban Governance, and Infrastructure Development. He also leads the WASH Innovation Hub of the government of Telangana, the state in India where ASCI is located. He serves on various interministerial and department level committees on WASH in schools, urban environmental sanitation, FWM, and urban development. He is an urban environmental planner and public health engineer with over 2 decades of experience in urban infrastructure and service delivery. Professor Chari is also online. Professor Chari, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sheila. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. So thank you very much. My presentation is more of field experience. with regard to our implementation, the city, 2 cities and the city leadership's implementation experience with regard to the citywide inclusive sanitation framework. Warangal, which is in India, both the cities are from India, is a million plus population city, and the other city is Narsapur, which is about 100,000 population city. Now, I will not, in fact, both the cities, if you look at the data available, more than 55% of the population, as per the census data, is represented by women. And Warangal has a large presence of third gender population for historical reasons. And both the cities have large population living in low-income settlements. We call them as slums. Now, Dr. Bethany and Alan spoke the theoretical construct for gender mainstreaming, looking at agency, resources, and institutional structures. So my presentation is more of what has worked in these cities when the city leadership started implementing gender intentional programming and putting a gender lens to all the activities that they have initiated. So basically, what has worked is the storyline of my presentation, and I'm speaking on behalf of these 2 cities from India. So there are broadly 5 things that have worked. One, the data has really enabled them to take informed decisions. The second important thing that worked, I'm going to speak about it at length, is voice and agency. In fact, the cities have really institutionalized some of these voice agency related issues by creating what we call gender forums and gender resource centers, which I'm going to speak about it. The very strong emphasis on infrastructure improvement by revisiting the infrastructure and creating sanitation infrastructure from the perspective of women and third gender. In fact, this participation in service delivery was another interesting experience of these 2 cities, and this experience is all in the last 2 years. Women are actively involved in across the value chain of sanitation, both in terms of entrepreneurship as well as livelihood development, and the state, the enabling conditions for gender mainstreaming was also attempts have been made. So what has worked is broadly around these 5 areas, and I'm going to speak about them. Number 1, in fact, the data, both the cities have consciously invested in data collection. The institution where I come from are the technical partners, knowledge partners. We help them to sort of construct the templates, train them, capacity building of the enumerators, capacity building of the municipal functionaries. But these 2, this whole effort was led by these 2 cities of Warangal and Narsapur. So they carried out what is called vulnerability studies. They carried out the usage of toilet infrastructure by women. In fact, city of Warangal has more than 140 public conveniences, and massive data was generated with regard to usage of public toilets, women's perception regarding public toilets and expressed needs. There were a lot of studies were carried out, a lot of data was collected. Based on that, in fact, gender audits were carried out, gap assessments were carried out, MHM readiness studies were carried out, and very importantly, separate data analysis was carried out on third gender. The sanitation needs assessment for third gender was carried out. So the point I'm making is that data was super important, and the city has invested in data generation, and corrections were taken, improvements were taken based on the data. Now, using this data, the cities have developed what is called action plans, but most importantly, these actions plans were integrated in the sanitation action plan, what we call as a city sanitation plans. Over and above that, there are the gender forums at the neighborhood level were institutionalized in Narsapur, not much in Warangal, but mostly in Narsapur. And based on that, gender resource centers were established. Gender resource centers are single point contact for women to access information, to access subsidies, to raise grievances. So this was another interesting development as part of the gender intentionality initiatives of these cities. The strategic planning task force, we call them as city sanitation task force. It's a multidisciplinary task force. A gender subgroup was created, and that's another interesting development for giving voice and agency for women. A dedicated sanitation helpline was established to pass on to understand and unlock subsidy flows for toilets and other support systems. This is another quick win as part of this effort. Very importantly, both the cities now, initially it started with Narsapur, they have a dedicated budget line for what we call is a gender budget line in the urban local body municipal budgeting. Training played a very important role, training of multi-stakeholders on gender, as Alan also mentioned, training of men towards gender intentionality was a very critical differentiator. Training of women in sanitation enterprise was a big success.
Charlie, could you wrap up in a few sentences?
Yeah, I'll do that. So what I can say is that these are some of the experience and visuals to amplify some of the issues. For example, a dedicated toilet infrastructure was created for women. Mobile toilet infrastructure were created for women because women have specific needs. They are actually hawkers in certain zones. They wanted, as part of the gender programming, they asked for mobile toilets that were created. Toilets were, all the public toilets were subjected to audits, and then they made it as gender intentional. Toilets were created for third gender subsidies were given for third gender. Very importantly, women were involved in operation and maintenance of the assets created. Women were actually participating in the desludging activities. In fact, there's large participation. 80% of the desludging activity in Narsapur is led by women, and about 40% was led by in Warangal. And very importantly, they have started occupying leadership positions, managerial positions in the FSTP operations. So capacity building played an important role. Now, all this is led to what is called state sanitation policy, where gender was actively integrated. To summarize the lessons learned, data and evidence can play a very important role. And I would like to thank Muse team for leading this activity and helping us. And I think much more can be done. Creating institutional structures for engagement and voice through Gender Forum was a very critical differentiator and very important initiative for us. And the third activity that we intend to take, and this is one of the important lessons, is policy is one important aspect, but how do you mainstream it and integrate in the municipal acts and rules is very important. This is a work in progress that we have led right now. This work, municipal act integration is important. That would lead to gender budgeting, structures, capacities, and MLE. Otherwise, it will be more of a policy. It will be more of an intent rather than an action. So this is a work in progress, and I would stop here, but I would be happy to take some questions later in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chari. Our next speaker is Mr. Alauddin Ahmed from ITN Buit. Mr. Alauddin Ahmed is an environmental engineer who brings over 20 years of experience in the Washington development sector, including research, policy advocacy, and curricula development. For a long period, he served the World Health Organization in managing large-scale projects with public health interventions for women, children, and vulnerable populations, and on humanitarian and emergency response. At present, as a project manager of IT and Buet, he is serving the region with capacity building initiatives on citywide inclusive sanitation. Welcome, all of you. One presentation.
Thank you all. And, yeah, great. So I'll be mainly talking about the countrywide sort of government interventions, as well as government policy plans and enabling factors and environments for gender. What is worked mainly, and later probably we can also talk further what has not worked or what could have been worked better. So as you can see, the country doesn't have any sort of limitation in terms of gender mainstreaming and gender equality, because the constitution gives itself the power to the government to do anything they want to do. I would want to focus on one line: nothing shall prevent the state from making a special provision in favor of women or for the advantage of any backward section of the population. So the protection is there from the top level of the country document and the national document. But what when it comes to the water supply and sanitation, there is a specific national policy for women's advancement that was passed by the government in 1997, and that calls for eliminate all sort of discrimination against women in all development and progress. And that was supported by the National Policy for Safe Water Supply and Sanitation 1998, where it was emphasized to encourage women in all sort of decision-making, planning, and management process, and include them in the committees where they can put the decisions. This document was further supported by several strategies. I can see the National Water Supply and Sanitation Strategy. And in the sanitation, what we are talking about today, there are two specific documents: the institutional and regulatory framework for water fecal sludge management, followed by a national action plan, how to implement that. I will come to that later, but probably Bangladesh is the first country in the world that has already approved a national strategy for ministerial hygiene management. So you can see that is also there from the country perspective. In the institutional and regulatory framework, it was encouraged to ensure female participation at all levels, and the subsequent national action plan to achieve that, which is time-bound and costed, also call for directly adopting gender transformative approach in all sort of planning, decision-making, implementation, and monitoring of FSM policy dialogue, investment program, and FSM service value chain. The government also, very recently regarding FSM, established a series FSM support cell with two specific units. And the one of the unit is Disaster and Climate Change Support Unit, which have a specific responsibility for gender mainstreaming and social inclusion in all the development projects being implemented by government through its national agencies, like the Department of Public Health Engineering, LGED, WASA, and other agencies. And if you see the specific activities of the Disaster and Climate Change Support Unit, I will only focus on the right side to specific activity. You can see there is a task for gender equality and the gender guideline and modules, and include them in all the development projects. And of course, a gender action plans to come up with the disaster and climate change support as well, because Bangladesh is highly prone to all this could be. Now, some ground level examples, mainly with the development partners. They are also partnering with us, like SNB, WaterAid. But here I am highlighting one intervention by the Practical Action in Faridpur. It's a city of Bangladesh, where the gender mainstreaming they focused on with several community improvement federation and of course settlement improvement committees where more than 50% are female participants. And there are specific cooperatives for female as well. You can see number 6 and the participation higher. And through those initiatives, of course, the entrepreneurship skill development, driving license program, women worker in co-composting plant and other business led by women was also facilitated. Now coming to the ITN, we worked for the capacity building and we hosted under BUET, and BUET started mainstreaming gender or at least promoting girls' education in technical education back. We can track back 1992 with this program, and that was continued. And ITN BUET further continued the program and recently with the Gates Foundation support. Apart from specific training modules and materials in different sessions, I also helped 15 master trainers for the sanitation sector and to build capacity for women. I'm not going details. The music study was also carried out with support of Emory and our partners Practical Action and Water in 2 cities. We are waiting for the analysis and final result this integration. The planned action also include capacity building and following the JC principle and gender logic change, develop comprehensive programs so that gender is further mainstreamed, and internship program and other mentor city program where gender mainstreaming can be showcased for the other cities as well. This is the final slides. As you can see, the Gender Development Index, Bangladesh started in 1990 with 0.65 around, and in 2021 it is very close to the world target. Now it is 0.9. So gender mainstreaming is improving, but how much water supply sanitation is contributing to that? That is a question that we'll figure out later. Thank you all for patience here.
Thank you, Alodin. Our last speaker, Quinn, was Beatrice able to join?
Yes, she's online.
Okay, good. Beatrice is here. Great. Okay, our last speaker is Beatrice Chuala Chibwe from LWSC, the Lusaka Water Sanitation Corporation. She's the gender coordinator at LWSC in Zambia. Her main responsibility is to enhance systems for effective gender mainstreaming. She has a master's degree in social work and human rights from the University in Sweden and a bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Zambia. Beatrice is also online and will be presenting her slides directly. Beatrice, are you able to share?
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from. I hope you are able to get me.
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you. Let me just share. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we're seeing Quinn is sharing your slides. We are able to see them.
Okay, thank you so much. Are you the one sharing or I share from here?
No, you don't need to share, Beatrice. Quinn is sharing, so you can just tell her when she should advance the slides. We're able to see them here.
Okay. Just, am I the one that is going to be moving the slides?
No, Quinn will move them, but you need to tell her.
Beatrice, I am sharing the slides and you can just tell me whenever you need to
Okay,
advance to.
great. Okay, I wanted to be sure about
Your
that.
slide.
Welcome everyone to the presentation. Yeah, so I'll share our journey as Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company. It's a quasi-government institution owned by the local authorities in Lusaka City. Yeah, so my outline will talk about the introduction. Yeah, then I'll talk about our journey and some lessons learned in the conclusion. We can move to the next slide. Okay, yeah, so Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company started a journey for gender mainstreaming in about 2008, but it wasn't very pronounced in our operations and service delivery because it was project-based until the Zambian government formed the national gender policy that guides our implementation for the sector. Yeah, so as a parastatal, it's a requirement to mainstream issues of gender and social inclusion in our operations. And then in 2018, Lusaka Water came up with a gender policy, which was launched together with a 5-year implementation strategy, which will come to an end at the end of this year. We are hoping to review the policy and also review the implementation strategy come next year as we develop our institutional strategic plan. Yeah, so our approach to gender mainstreaming is two-phased. We look at mainstreaming within the institution and also in service delivery. We see that this is important because, as I said, mainstreaming gender is a new phenomenon in the institution and we require capacity within to be able to identify and address the issues of gender and social inclusion. Yeah, then our institutional structure is any institution in Lusaka, Zambia, and in Zambia, by the way, that has a full-time gender coordinator, which is my job. This is my bread and butter every day. This is what I do. I'm supported by 15-member gender committee members who are a representative from various departments within the institution. We can move to the next slide. Okay, yeah, so as I alluded to that, for us to mainstream, we needed to build capacity within the institution, and that is what we are doing. We started with the training of members of staff. So far, we are at 80%, so that the members of staff are able to identify and address these issues wherever they are based from. Because as I'm alone as a full-time member of staff, it's not possible to be everywhere all the time. Lusaka Water is a big institution. We have about 742 employees. So for us to be able to mainstream, we needed to build capacity among the members of staff that I don't have to be there everywhere where they are based, but they can identify these issues and address them. Yeah. Then the other aspect was to strengthen the capacity of the communities to be able to identify gender and social inclusion issues within the communities. As you know, water and sanitation services and hygiene are mainstreamed from the households. Yeah, so the company does lead to, apart from guiding the households how to go about it. So we needed to build capacity among the key stakeholders to be able to identify these issues where they are, and also partner with us where need be, so that we work together to mainstream. Yeah. Then the other one aspect is knowledge generation, because as a new phenomenon in the sector, we needed to build knowledge base, because they say knowledge is power. We needed to generate information where we are as an institution in terms of gender mainstreaming, and to that effect, we conduct a gender audit within the institution to look at to assess the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities that the institution is presented with, and be able to mainstream these issues, and also be able to make informed decisions based on that. And what we have done related to that is the intentional documentation of what we are doing. Under the citywide inclusive sanitation, we are documenting everything that we are doing so that we are able to share the lessons with other institutions as well, and also to incorporate in future projects so that we don't have to labor again. Next slide, please. Yeah. Then one of the key things that we have done, the old documents that we had as an institution, they were not engendered or they were not mainstreamed. So one of the key aspects that we have done is to review the processes and procedures for the institution, which we call standard operating procedures. Especially that I'm one person in charge of gender mainstreaming. We needed to build accountability across the institution. That doesn't matter where the people are based, it will be a requirement for them to mainstream. So what we've done is we have embedded gender mainstreaming and social inclusion in our processes, procedures, and policies, so that the members of staff are accountable. So when they are doing their monthly reports, it is expected that they also report on what they have done regarding gender mainstreaming, what challenges they had, how they solved them, and so on, so that management is kept informed on the progress that we are making. The next slide, please. Yeah, so some of the key lessons we've learned as I conclude, there are many, but I picked on the three that I thought were important to this session. That sanitation service provision goes beyond the infrastructure development. Yeah, because it's one thing to build an on-site facility or a sewerage network. If people are not involved with in whatever we are doing, it will be a failed project at the end of the day. And we have to focus on the entire sanitation service chain. What usually happens for an institution like Lusaka Water, a utility in Lusaka, it's very easy for us to concentrate only on infrastructure, and we'll say, no, we constructed 100 toilets, we laid so much kilometer of sewerage network, but we forget that it's important to ensure that these issues of gender and social inclusion are mainstreamed in whatever we are doing, because they speak to the sustainability of a project. They also speak to the needs of women and girls, especially who are impacted when there is poor sanitation and water supply. Yeah, since we say that women and girls are the managers of water and sanitation at household level, but usually what is happening and what is fascinating that they are usually sidelined in the sector, and they are not involved in the entire sanitation service chain. So you find maybe they are only accommodated at infrastructure or maybe at treatment. But we find that the issues of gender and social inclusion cuts across the entire sanitation chain, from containment, transportation, treatment and disposal, and also reuse of the fecal sludge. The other one that we've discovered is that gender and power still play a major role in increasing access to sanitation services. Whoever has the power and resources determines the pace of the toilet construction or whatever we are doing, also determines the location of the sanitation infrastructure, also determines the resources and type of sanitation infrastructure to be constructed. So what plays out, mainly the women and the girls in these urban areas we serve in Osaka, they don't have land tenure. So most of the properties are rented properties. So you find they don't have power, or they are just married off to this gentleman in the community, and they don't have the power to say anything, even to determine the infrastructure to be constructed at the household level. So dealing with the root causes of these barriers will help really address the sustainability of sanitation services. The last one there is that gender stereotyping continue to pose a barrier to improve sanitation access and provision, inhibiting participation of women in wash sectors. So like, I give the example of our company. We have, out of the employees, the 742 plus, only 18% of those are women. So it poses a contradiction, because if we are to say that at household level, it's the women that are managers of water and sanitation and hygiene, But here we are only a few women within the institution. How are we going to make sure we answer to the deep needs that the women and girls are experiencing? And then the women out there, they will not be comfortable to speak to the men that are employees of the company. So we look at this, and that's why at the moment we are carrying gender mainstreaming trainings, which I've already alluded to. We see to it that voices of men are also incorporated in the sanitation sector. And also, even as they go out, especially there are few women in the institution, we need to build capacity among the men to be able to identify these aspects wherever they are operating from. And those are some of the examples, the pictures that of the sanitation project we are doing under the Lusaka citywide sanitation. Yeah. So we see the toilet there accommodating the people in the wheelchair, and also the other one where there's a seat for the elderly and a handle where they can hold. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice. I would like to invite Bethany and Alauddin to come up for a question and answer session. I think it's so impressive across the different presentations, the way that each presentation highlighted, I think, the importance of the use of data, the intentionality of gender integration, being very intentional from the beginning and developing plans, designs, procedures, training plans, being very intentional about capacity building on gender, resourcing, budget lines, and being intentional about incorporating the voices of men and third gender. Also, I felt like that was a common theme throughout the presentations, and I thought it was really interesting. I have lots of questions. I have some prepared questions, but I would like to open it up to the audience, recognizing that we have about half an hour left in our session. Now, I'm sure that there are questions from the audience. I know there's at least one in the Q&A box here from Zoom. Oh, will the recording of the session be available? Yes, it will be. That's an important question. And I believe it will be available online through the conference website. I would like to open it up to the audience, and for those online, please do continue to add questions to the Q&A box. We have microphones available, but I think everyone can hear online also throughout the room. So what questions do we have from the audience? There's a lot to absorb. Yes.
I was wondering, and this can be for anyone who presented, how do you see the sort of monitoring of representation of women in meetings, on boards, throughout the sanitation supply chain, jiving with the concepts of women's voice and choice? So the idea that maybe we as a sector have this incentive to up the proportion of women, in any of our activities, but considering women's empowerment, and yes, the concept of women should certainly have the opportunity to participate in any of these activities, but does monitoring for a higher proportion of women present actually speak to women's voice and choice?
It's a great question. I'll just repeat it in case Beatrice, Alan, and Professor Tari, I'll paraphrase and summarize. The question was about monitoring women's participation in sanitation activities, and how do we know that we are providing the opportunity for women to participate? Is that something that we can monitor? And then how do you monitor women's participation in a way that is representing their voice and their choice to participate?
Yeah.
Any takers on that question?
Alan, would you like to go first?
Prof, you go first.
Okay, that sounds, I've been just modest, just asked you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think if I've understood correctly, what I can say is that there is a very clear evidence. So what happens in India is that women, there are national programs where particularly for mechanization of sanitation activity, there are quite a few subsidies and loans. And these loans and subsidies are basically targeted for women. So if you see the progress, more and more women are coming to access these loans, and often not for the benefit of taking subsidies, but actually getting involved in this space from the point of view of jobs. So in fact, sanitation has become a major livelihood activity because of the national schemes and programs. And there is a very clear evidence of more and more women coming forward and queuing up to access these funds and subsidies and loans, number one. Number two, for example, the town where one of the towns I mentioned about Narsapur, there is no competition for them. All the desludging activities are carried out by women. As in fact, they employ men as drivers and cleaners, and there's no competition for them. So this transition and transformation happened in a period of 3-4 years. So again, I would say that if there are right kind of targeting, right kind of information made available, I think we have a clear evidence of transformation. That's number one. Now, whether it is benefiting the women, I think there is again a clear evidence that they are in charge, they control the funds, they are actually, I would say, buying trucks from the savings that they have got. So I would say that my sample is limited to 2 towns or 2 cities, but I think if there is an opportunity, there is a very clear evidence of more and more women getting into this space and leading from the front. If I have answered you correctly, if I have understood you correctly.
Thank you, Professor Chari. Any other? Alan, would you?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, Beatrice, please go ahead.
Yes, maybe from our side, what we have done is just to, first of all, to do the basics. That's to ensure that when we are doing the invites, we invite both men and women, and also people with disabilities if we are able to. Yeah, so it's a starting point. Then when we are doing the registration, we make sure that we capture the gender of the participants and ensure that when we are conducting the meetings, everyone is free to participate. And when we notice maybe women are keeping quiet in the meetings, we tag them along to make sure that their voices are equally heard. And the other thing we are doing is to have focus group discussions where we separate the women from the men, and then each group discusses what pertains to them, and then we are able to incorporate their needs and their aspirations into the projects we are doing.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, giving people opportunities to participate in different ways. So ways that might be more comfortable for them so that they can choose. Any other?
Let me, I mean, it's a difficult question. Monitoring of any qualitative parameter is always difficult. And for Bangladesh, I mean, how do you monitor women empowerment where our Prime Minister is a lady, our opposition of leader is a lady, our speaker in the member of parliament is a lady. So all the top decision-making bodies are women, but whether women are interested in sanitation or not, or whether their voice is heard or not, that is a question. What Professor Chari mentioned, it works well, monopolize the entire things based on women, or at least for certain extent of time, so that their representation grow and come up, and then we can integrate others. but it is also important to know to give them the choice. I mean, whether we could make sanitation as a, I would say, attractive for any of the community, despite male or female. I mean, as long as it is not an attractive business, it will be difficult to attract anyone, not only male, but female as well. So we probably need to work on that, yes, sanitation is a business, like how Bangladesh come up with the girls' education with so much empowerment, definitely provided some sort of incentive. They are getting midday meals, they are receiving monthly payments as well. Their education is completely free for the girls at up to class 12, not for the boys, the case is not so. So this sort of intervention and initiative also need in the sanitation sector as well, where we'll be able to mainstream women, gender, and the marginalized group in the sector.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, reducing in education that Bangladesh made education free for girls, but not for boys.
Yeah.
So is there a parallel in sanitation where you can reduce the actual cost or the opportunity costs for women in ways that will allow them to participate more? I think that's, yeah, really, really great. Yes.
Thanks, Sheila. Manish Bailey from Iris Group. Thank you, Alaudin. And this question is to Professor Chari, Alaudin, and Beatrice. All of you have worked with the board. I'm curious, when we include women and marginalized communities in the sanitation value chain, especially the informal sanitation value chain, they are by default very often part of the informal sanitation value chain. How do we prevent re-stigmatization of certain marginalized communities from happening? How do we work with the community at large to ensure that we're not reinventing the stigmatization chain? And the second question is to Alaudin. I'm really curious about the rollout of the National Emission Action Plan in Bangladesh and any lessons learned for other countries that are following through.
Thank you. I'll just repeat your question so that Professor Chari and Beatrice can hear, because the question was specifically for the three of you, Professor Chari, Beatrice, and Alaudin. It was about the first question was about marginalized populations and how do we make sure that we are not increasing or reinforcing their marginalization by integrating them into sanitation value chains. Is that?
Yes, especially those who are part of the informal sanitation value chain.
Right, especially those who are part of the informal sanitation value chain. And then the second question was specifically for Alaudin about the MHM policy in Bangladesh and how it will be rolled out and operationalized. So Alaudin, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Thank you. Regarding the first question, the risk is always there. I mean, whenever you try to make things more pro-gender sensitive or try to eliminate the equalities with certain groups, but the business opportunity you make for them is remain within the same sort of activity, the risk is always there that they are more traumatized or more, sort of excluded out from the rest of the society. So here, one of the things definitely required, we believe, is some sort of institutionalization of these workers and whatever business it is. Because at some point, as Professor Chari also mentioned, regulation will have to come in force where, all sort of works is recognized equally and they have a choice. I mean, rather them to patronize them to go to certain work, rather they feel encouraged to come to this work because this has more profitability or more value or more dignity, something like that. So that sort of work and intervention will have to work out from the country level. And as long as a government will start thinking it about a service rather than a business, government will start provisioning a lot of what I would say, social safety net program. Not necessarily they will have to continue this job. If the things are mechanized, they can be shifted to other areas of the program or other livelihood opportunities. Those programs are available. There are specific ministry to work on that, on women and children affairs. So through that, this can happen. Coming back to the MHM strategy, how it is rolling out or how it is working, of course, the strategy, the rolling out is a challenge, but it has started showing some sort of positive. The government has already withdrawn most of the taxes on sanitation pad and menstrual hygiene management kit and other things required on that, and promoting national-based industries to come forward. And not only that, the other products as well as the businesses through what you can say corporate social responsibility, they are also integrated in the process so that girls can have either free or a subsidized race product in educational institutions, in their workplace and other institutions. I know Dhaka University started just launch such a program through vending machine where subsidized race products are available, and these are coming forward gradually. But it needs to seen over a long period whether the strategy has really changed the situation, particularly the stigma and other things involved with MHM in the country.
Professor Chari or Beatrice?
Yeah.
would you like to-
Thank you very much. I think it's a extremely pertinent question, and thank you for raising it. In fact, I can draw an analogy where when India started moving towards open defecation free society, trying to provide toilets at home, one of the school of thoughts was the burden on women, in fact, has increased, moving away from open defecation to having a toilet at home, because the toilet has to be often maintained by the women. So earlier, men and children used to go in open areas. Now they're all going inside the house, and the maintenance of the toilet, the burden now comes on the women. So there is definitely a risk. But I think the risk is a calculated risk, and one has to define certain rules of the game to mitigate the risk and ensure that the burden doesn't fall squarely on women. On the same issue you raised, yes, there is a sense of stigmatization even in the process of the fecal slut septage management issues or whatever we discussed so far. I think the way we are trying to, this is a work in progress and experimentation. The three approaches that we are looking at it. Number one, in fact, governments are now slowly recognizing that sanitation is a public service. It cannot be kept informal. It is squarely the responsibility of the municipalities to deal with the sanitation, be it desludging, be it provision of toilet or treatment and disposal, whichever way, whatever could be the segment of the value chain sanitation. So once we recognize that it is no longer an informal activity, it is a municipal function, then comes the social security net, then comes the mechanization. So which is opposite of stigmatization is to go for heavy mechanization, and that's where the subsidies and incentives are coming. And thirdly, the social net, the minimum wages. So the whole idea is to professionalize the service, to prevent stigmatization, to allow entry and exit of any community into this space. So I think it is a work in progress, I must say. However, there's a lot needs to be done. More evidence has to be gathered. But I think the trend is towards positive right now. And I think it is moving towards what I call professionalized sanitation service to prevent any stigma associated with it. And that's, I think, is we need to generate, of course, more evidence on this. But currently the trends are towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chari. Beatrice or Ellen, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'll just agree with the previous speakers. Yeah, but I also want to add that, the feeling of being marginalized, dealing with the vulnerable populations, especially in the informal settlements. For what we have seen is that projects where the beneficiaries are involved, they are sustainable, and they have a unique touch to them where their needs their needs are reflected in the infrastructure that we are doing. It's so different with the projects that we are done without any consideration of gender needs to the households and so on. But the projects that we have that have left a mark for Lusaka Water are those projects that we got the households involved, no matter how poor they are, how vulnerable they are, and they they raise issues that that if incorporated in a project, they cause the project to be sustainable, and their needs are met. I think it's one thing to be vulnerable and to enforce these aspects. But I think what we have noticed for Zambia and for Lusaka, the more you involve them, the more dignified they feel. They feel respected. They feel honored. They feel that they also can contribute something. I think that's what I can add for now.
Yeah, great. And so sort of institutionalization, professionalization, and it sounds, Beatrice, almost like transferring power to the people who are involved and having them have a voice in the process. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, great. Alan?
Maybe Sheila, I'll just quickly add as well.
Please do.
Again, like Beatrice, I also agree with the Lud, Prof and Beatrice that the empowerment journey actually starts from, if you like, from that point of involving the various groups in the informal settlements, and that in many ways it's like, I don't want to use this analogy directly, but permit me to mention it. That if you have an alcoholic problem, first you admit you have the problem, and then you start working towards it. So in many ways, the conversations and activities around informal settlements really try to make clear what the problem is in these communities. Sometimes some of these households and communities are not that they're clueless about their problems, but because they've lived in such conditions for so long and don't have an alternative or don't know what the alternative is, they're just quite happy to tag along. So coming and starting to have the conversations about the challenges and what possibly could be a better step actually quickly moves them from being marginalized to actively participating in their own empowerment. And at the end of the day, you actually find it as a very strong tool, not only for empowering them and their households, but also for sustainability of the very many water and sanitation related activities that take place in the communities. As I shared earlier, we're seeing more and more women participating across the whole value chain in these sanitation related activities. And this comes from this information that they get from the opportunities that are availed and also shown, and then they take off with the opportunities and build a better community for themselves. So the marginalization, yes, it's a risk, as the Prof said, but it can be, in his words, a calculated risk. When you weigh the outcomes versus that, you actually see that there's great benefit overall in empowering these communities to take charge of their sanitation going forward. And maybe a very quick one to the first question on the measurement or monitoring of women representation. Just to highlight again something that Beatrice mentioned, that what we see in Kampala at a household level is women taking a greater influence in terms of the decision making, in terms of the designs or the technologies to use, even though they may not necessarily have the resources to do that. So that happens a lot at the household level. When you come to the community level, the stats drop a little. And so here we start to see the effect of power plays coming into play and the like. And so, like Beatrice mentioned, generating the numbers at those community levels is very important, because then you start to counteract the effect of the power plays for the better good of the communities and the women at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. We have about 10 minutes left. I just want to check. Oh, great. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm called Jacinta. I'm from Uganda. My question goes to, thank you so much, first of all, for the nice presentations. My question goes to Bangladesh, and I'm more interested in the MHM strategy. In Uganda, we have tried to come up with a similar strategy, but Minister of Education was the one taking lead because of MHM in schools. But then we find that MHM is a cross-sector kind of issue. We have a whole Ministry of Gender, but they are not really prioritizing MHM. We have Ministry of Health. They are not yet there. So it was being driven majorly by Ministry of Education. They try to post it, and they try to get all these sectors together, but has not been that easy. So from your experience, who is driving MHM in Bangladesh? Who is responsible for ensuring that this strategy is implemented? That's what I would like to learn from you. Who is in the driving seat? Who is, because yesterday also there's a session I attended late afternoon, and it was showing that MHM is supposed to be like cutting across all the SDG indicators. But then in Uganda, you find that it's major Ministry of Education that is driving it because of MHM in schools. Thank you.
I'll just summarize for the people online. Again, the question was about the MHM strategy in Bangladesh and who is driving the strategy, who's responsible for implementing the strategy. Is it the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health? Who is driving and implementing it?
Great. So thanks for the question. Very important question, particularly when it will come to the implementation and scaling up of the strategy. It will be very important. The water supply, sanitation, and hygiene is looked after by the Ministry of Local Government in Bangladesh. So it is the Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development, and Cooperatives. So as it comes under the purview of Ministry of Local Government, it automatically inherits them some power, because when local government wants something, all other ministries are supposed to help them or make it possible to work for them. So the local government ministry took hygiene very seriously, and they started implementing the ministerial hygiene related issues with other ministry first, rather than going for the strategy, like how to integrate the knowledge with the Ministry of Education. So the Ministry of Education took it, and in the curriculum, it is now built in. Similarly, Ministry of Health, of course, they are supporting the Ministry of Local Government, as the water supply sanitation is a public health issue. So they are traditionally supporting the local government on those sort of issue. And when it comes to the Ministry of Health, of course, Ministry of Health specifically prepared a national strategy for water sanitation and hygiene in healthcare facilities. So there they also included the ministerial hygiene management part. So their buy-in was also there already for the strategy. So finally, when local government ministry come up with this plan to develop a national level strategy, they devised a committee involving all these ministries: Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Women and Children Affairs. Even some of other ministry was later consulted, like Ministry of Industries, because of the products, and those sort of ministries were conducted. And finally, the strategy was shared with everyone then. And everyone found it's the issue that need to be addressed. And of course, world is moving. And as I mentioned, certain enabling factors is built in the country, because our Prime Minister is a woman, of course, and rest of the decision-making bodies will find top level lot of women. not at the local level, institution level still. But as the ministry took the initiative, the local government bodies also come up and provided their support. And development partners like UNICEF, of course, and other INGOs and donors like World Bank, ADB, Gates Foundation, they were also played instrumental role for the advocacy of the strategy. Finally, it was published by that. That answers.
Thank you so much. Let me just triple check that yes, okay, we don't have any more questions online. So I think we can close. I want to thank our speakers, Dr. Caruso, Professor Chari, Alan, Beatrice, and Alauddin. Thank you everyone for your engagement and participation, and please feel free to find any of us if you have further questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Alan.
Nice moderator.
Yeah.